says light, but it doesn't. It says L-I-G-H-T. Oh, yeah. It must have been in the fourth grade.
How's everybody? Good old Texas welcome to you. Welcome you all or something. We're glad to see you. Welcome to the fourth annual. When this was started 4 years ago, I didn't expect at all for it to grow to the size it did last year on the 30th anniversary. And to be quite truthful, we weren't even honest if we'd, or sure that we would be able to pull it off again. But here we are. And I hope you've read the letter that Mary Farrell and I put in your directory, because we plan to continue this. And I think it's a need, and I think it will grow now continuously again until the 35th anniversary. And by the 35th anniversary, I hope we know a whole lot more about the truth of this situation than we know tonight. So let's work hard. But I want to welcome you on behalf of the symposium planners, Mary Farrell and myself, and say that we're committed to continue this quest for truth. If you've not read the letter or the quote at the top of it, I want to read it to you. And for those of you who can't read, well, you'll know what it says. This is a time for courage and a time for challenge. Neither conformity nor complacency will do. Neither the fanatics nor the faint-hearted are needed. So let us not be petty when our cause is so great. Let us not quarrel amongst ourselves when our nation's future is at stake. Let us stand together with renewed confidence in our cause. That's a quotation from a speech of John Kennedy's that, of course, was never delivered in Austin, Texas, prepared for November 22nd, 1963. So when I saw that, I thought, hey, this applies to us. And I hope that we'll heed that advice and that we will come together and work together very, very hard as the new files release is in process. And we'll see things, folks, that have been hidden for 30 years. And there's been a lot of light going to be shown on this particular subject, and I'm glad for it. Well, it's my honor and privilege. I'm not going to talk to you much. We got a guy here who knows how to talk. And so I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. I'm tickled to death that he's the one that's been selected to do this. Walt Brown, Ph.D., has been studying the Kennedy assassination virtually since it happened. He has written The People versus Lee Harvey Oswald, which was published in 1992. If you've not read that book, do it. It's a splendid book based on fact. It's a novel, but the novel connotation ought to be put on another book that was handed to the American people in 1964. And so you can enjoy this one. He's also written Blue Death, Red Patsy, White Lies, which is due out this next year. He has written The War on Omission, which will hopefully be out in late 1995, so you can see this man has been busy. As well as he's also written a JFK monograph, which is due right now. It's not currently out, but will be in a few days from Prevailing Winds Research. He is also the author of John Adams and the American Press, to be published in early 1995. He is, of course, a regular contributor to articles and book reviews of the various major JFK newsletters and journals, and also serves on the advisory boards of the JFK Resource Center here in Dallas, as well as the Coalition on Political Assassinations you'll be hearing from tomorrow, based in Washington, D.C. He also enjoys writing suspense fiction and is also working on a book that will take a unique look at Watergate. And I can't wait for that one either. So without spending his time, I want you to give a good welcome to Dr. Walt Brown.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? You took a couple of my gags, Gary. I had asked Gary to mention somewhere in the introduction that, so that I don't have to do this one by one with everybody, people come up to me afterwards and say, what, you know, I've read your work, et cetera, what do you do? And then I have to look at them, kind of lip turned down. I said, well, I teach 4th grade. And I was hoping Gary would mention that because you need to know it just in case as I get going tonight, I lapse into, you know, so listen, boys and girls. So if I do, please forgive me and understand. And when I get past the part that I've memorized, I'll have to go to the glasses, so then you'll know. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to the members of the research community who began the process of holding this symposium for each of the past few years. And I would also like to thank the full-time organizers who bring their special talents to ASK. Without both groups, I would not be here speaking to you this evening. And having said that, I suppose it's only fair to also extend my dubious thanks to the conspirators themselves as well as the members of the Warren Commission, without whom I would not be speaking to you here this evening. Although you may construe my subsequent remarks to be critical of the Warren Commission, they are not exclusively to be singled out for criticism, as we must remember that they, in fact, received precious little help. They got virtually nothing from the FBI, nothing from the CIA, they got nothing from SMERSH, although they did get a great deal from Spectre. But it is truly an honor to be selected to give this keynote address at this year's conference. And I can go back very easily in my mind to September 15th when I received the invitation at the mail. And I think my first immediate thought was, I can't believe this. Last year they had Norman Mailer, and this year they've got somebody who knows something about the case. Thank you. Shortly thereafter, however, the real enormity of the task in front of me dawned on me, because I realized I've been given the responsibility to share with you this evening and throughout the conference and on Monday's panel a critique of the Warren Report, which will undoubtedly be considered as the 20th century's most famous and controversial work of fiction. I then thought that perhaps I could do with this keynote address what no previous such address had done, and I decided to make this hour tonight a debate with Gerald Ford, the lone assassin, the lone surviving member of the Warren Commission. As you're no doubt aware, Mr. Ford has not only outlived any of the other commissioners, but he has also long outlived the public's belief in the Warren Report. I immediately made the necessary contacts only to receive ground rules that Mr. Ford would only agree to a debate if all words that I would use would be 5 letters or less. Initially, it seemed to pose a challenge, although I agreed inasmuch as it occurred to me at the time that most of my references to the Warren Report are in fact 4-letter words. So there wasn't any problem. As it turned out, however, as it always does seem to happen, Mr. Ford had the last laugh as he informed me that he too would be giving a keynote address at a symposium this evening, and that he would be addressing far more people than I would. And I have to tell you, I was amazed because I never realized that there are that many people that believe they have been beamed up into UFOs. However, out of fairness, since I had sent him a great deal of material, I did send him one last thing, and I said, look, if it's something you want me to put into the record, send me something in email. Sure enough, email. I suppose by now that you realize that such addresses are supposed to begin on humorous notes, unless, of course, you remember Norman Mailer's. But I don't want you to think that I shall devote the entire evening, nor point the entire symposium totally in the direction of Warren Commission bashing. As a matter of fact, in my research, I've discovered at least a dozen questions that they asked that had some merit. And the number is subject to debate, but Also, I want to share with you an experience kind of unique to researchers and friends that have visited me and sat in the study where I've done my work over the last few years. In one corner of the room, and the room is filled with autographed memorabilia, sports, politicians, or movie stars, whatever. But in one corner of the room, there were 3 nicely framed autographed photos kind of by themselves. And knowing me and knowing my work, people that visit me are surprised to see on the wall, of all places, a signed photograph of former President Ford. Right beneath it is a signed photograph of Senator Arlen Specter. Eventually, however, the visitors that are there are just naturally drawn to the third picture, which is a very beautiful, very bittersweet signed portrait of Emmett Kelly Jr. The photo of the clown that I just mentioned, and maybe I should be more specific here as to which clown, the photo of Emmett Kelly Jr. replaced a photograph of Clint Eastwood that had once hung there. And I took that down after the first time I saw In the Line of Fire. Toward the end of the movie, a pensive Secret Service agent Horrigan says, "You know something? For years I've been listening to all these idiots on bar stools with all their pet theories on Dallas." And the first time I heard that, it really hit home a little bit, even though I neither drink nor do I have any pets in Dallas. Yet having seen the movie several times now, I have to tell you that I would rather be an idiot on a bar stool than an idiot on a running board, following the car where the president is being shot in broad daylight. And if caring about the memory of John Kennedy and caring about the truth of his assassination makes someone a bar stool idiot, then I guess I am proud to be one. And if anybody here feels the same way, I would ask you to stand up for just a minute and be counted for something that matters. Thank you all. I would like to thank you for that, and I'd also like to add that I personally, on any given day, would rather be a barstool idiot than a senator from Pennsylvania who disgraced himself with Gene Hill, who disgraced himself with Anita Hill, and who regularly disgraces himself on Capitol Hill. Although I wrote that prior to this week, and I'm afraid now that I've said it, he's allowed equal time since he's a candidate. But then again, I'm not, so. Changing direction slightly, it can truly be said of the Warren Commission, never did so few people with so little talent spend so little time and produce so little in the way of results. And that, ladies and gentlemen, not boys and girls, friends, fellow barstool conspiracy freaks, will essentially be my text for this evening. Although I must tell you, I struggled a little bit for the right verb to try and indicate what would we be doing here this weekend. We are here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Warren Commission? I don't think so. We are here to commemorate the 30th anniversary? Well, that was a little closer, although it sounds in a sense like the issue of a new postage stamp, which in a sense gives it some relevance because law dictates that you must be dead to appear on a U.S. stamp, and I can think of few things more dead than the Warren Commission findings. Nevertheless, I settled on the verbs reconsider with respect to the Warren Commission and rededicate with respect to what we need to do from here on out. The reconsideration would begin with something I call the Warren Commission and me. I was 16 years old on that gray New Jersey afternoon when John Kennedy was killed. And like so many other Americans, I was numb. President Eisenhower could have easily passed for just about anybody's grandfather, or the original Uncle Sam for that matter. Yet John Kennedy was younger than my father. Kennedy had wit, a quality I obviously admire. He had, as he used to say, great vigor. He lived life fully, as we now know. Yet in all things, as Tommy Lee Jones said in the movie JFK, he was a man of true panache. On the Sunday after John Kennedy was killed, in living black and white, Oswald was killed. And as many of you may realize, or some may not, it was Jack Ruby's bullet that created the Warren Commission. Had Oswald not been publicly executed, there would not have been a Warren Commission. But more to the point, it was not the death of Kennedy, which just left us numb and praying that someday the sun would in fact shine again, but rather the death of Oswald, the killing of one lone nut by another lone nut that got Americans angry. Americans demanded the truth. What they got was the Warren Commission. Or as I suggest in a book that Gary referenced, the Warren Omission. I will touch on this topic in much greater depth on Monday morning on the Warren Omission panel. In the meantime, I'm certainly thankful to the organizers for naming a panel after an upcoming book. The media, and I'll be addressing this also, now today perceived as an enemy of the JFK research community, openly ridiculed the slipshod procedures that passed for police work in Dallas during that tragic weekend. And by 1963, 1964, people had a pretty good idea of just who and what J. Edgar Hoover was all about. And many people, and many Texans in particular, did not like the FBI climbing all over a case where they had absolutely no business. Yet despite what they would like us to believe was the most exhaustive investigation in history, and maybe it was because I could exhaust myself telling you 10% of the stuff they did wrong, in September 1964, the American public was told by 7 honorable men that the Dallas police were right, and J. Edgar Hoover was right, and that Oswald and Oswald only committed the assassination of the president. Then people read the evidence, studied the testimony, viewed the exhibits, at least to the extent that such material was available, and wondered very vocally why, if a lone nut killed the president, materials were tucked away until the year 2039, 75 years after the report was delivered to Lyndon Johnson. In the doubts created by that early and often difficult research, many unanswered questions were raised. But one thing was for certain: we had been denied a very fundamental truth. As time passed, we came to realize it. We came to realize that we could be told anything by our government, and as its little children, we would believe what we were told. We were told to believe Vietnam. We were told of the lone assassin who killed Martin Luther King, and of yet another lone assassin who stood 4 feet in front of Robert Kennedy and killed him with a bullet that struck in the back of his head from a distance of less than 2 inches. We were told to accept Watergate as a third-rate burglary, which it would have remained had not 2 reporters doggedly believed otherwise. We were told to accept Iran-Contra Gate and Darrell Gates. Somewhere amidst that wreckage of crapola, we lost the truth and we lost our country. We lost the country to interests so immense that they could care less about all of us. And whatever they want from us, as long as it had the old stamp of approval, that was the truth no matter what we thought. Today, sadly, they own us. And the reason I've spent as much time as I have trying to come to grips with the Warren Commission is because the death of John Kennedy and the subsequent publication of the official hoax called the Warren Report were the first 2 down payments made by the power brokers to own us and to own our country. A great deal of outstanding John F. Kennedy-related research is happening as we gather tonight. Amazingly, there were a few tantalizing morsels in the recent document regurgitation, and you will be reading some new and some interesting revelations in the weeks and months to come. And you will learn much from these new works. Yet what will change? In late 1991 and early 92, thanks to a cinematic presentation called JFK, a whole new generation of Americans learned that something a great deal more sinister than a misfit punk with a cheap rifle had changed the American landscape. Stone's movie did not give us all the answers, but it certainly gave us some very valid questions. Ultimately, however, the outcome was predictable. The regular cast of government stooges got key media spots. They pointed to a shiny set of 26 books and then told the world, 99.99% of whom have never read one word of those 26 books, that the Warren Report is holy writ. Well, whatever it is, it at least rhymes with writ. I'd also like to add, after seeing JFK on TV this week, that there was probably a great deal of truth in the statement that was made by Kevin Costner when he wondered aloud if Earl Warren read what was in those 26 volumes. On a personal level, I'm curious about how much any of them read, and I doubt we'll ever learn the answer to that either. The Warren Commission and the subsequent report, therefore, to me, are the ultimate bumps in the road. No matter what we do as researchers, and no matter what we find out, John Q. Public out there in Peoria says, but the Warren Commission said. So that's why my task has always been, I start there. If we can clear the decks of that, then we can move on. We're here tonight because we don't believe that obvious drivel. Many others still do because we haven't disproved the basic premise, and the basic premise is still the Warren Commission. In my own way, I've tried to disprove the basic premise. In the People versus Lee Harvey Oswald, I demonstrated, at least to my own satisfaction and to the satisfaction of many, many very fine people, some of whom I notice here tonight, who took the time to write to me, that Oswald could never have been convicted had he gone to trial for the murder of John Kennedy. And I've been asked many times, is there any nagging doubt ever that you were wrong and Oswald did it? And the answer is always the same. There's no doubt he was exactly what he said he was, the patsy. In the Kennedy Assassination Quiz Book, which is the monograph that Gary referred to, published imminently, I tried to create a vehicle where facts, not rumors and speculations, could be presented in an entertaining format. The same is true for the audio cassette that I recorded, which is called Sound Bites from the Warren Commission. And if you've heard one of those hard-headed, if you have or know of one of those hard-headed friends that can't be convinced, treat them to some comedy. Let them hear the absolute absurdities of that investigation presented in a different kind of format. And maybe, just maybe, they'll come around a little bit. And remember, we've got that 1964 bump in the road to get over. In Blue Death, Red Patsy, White Lies, I used the Warren Commission's evidence to prove things happened that they didn't want to tell us about. And in the Warren omission, I honestly believe that I dismantled the Warren Commission. As many of you know, I counted every question they asked. And I categorized the questions into one of 8 levels of relevance, and then pointed out that of the 488 witnesses called, only 177 of those witnesses, 36.27% of the total witnesses, were called to testify about the death of John Kennedy. They were asked a total of 30,530 questions, or 27.77% of the Warren Commission's total, but only 2,065 of those questions, or 1.8% of the Warren Commission's total, were valid questions about the death of John F. Kennedy. In the same study, I noted that of the 3,912 published exhibits, only 79 of them, or roughly 90 pages out of 9,831 pages, were of any real evidentiary value. And you know pretty much what the rest of that junk was. And during the month of September, I completed a Warren Commission time management study which totally destroys every premise heretofore considered regarding the Commission, and I will be sharing those findings with you on Monday morning. The Warren Commission and the Warren Report, the onset of the loss of American innocence. And until we repair that specific damage, it will not be our country, and we will not be allowed to know what the truth is. It is fair at this point to let Clint Eastwood, the Secret Service agent in The Line of Fire, speak again. When he was reminded in the movie that he was penalized a month's salary for some of John Kennedy's indiscretions, he told us that was different. He was different. The whole damn country was different. Yes, Agent Horrigan, things were different then. A great deal of it had to do with that vibrant young man who got into a limousine at Love Field and was carried out of it at Parkland Hospital. Those truths we know. So what truths did the Warren Report tell us? Let me read you some of the things they said, and I'll comment on them as we go along. Quote, President Lyndon B. Johnson, by Executive Order number 11130, dated November 29, 1963, created this commission to investigate the assassination on November 22nd of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. The President directed the commission to evaluate all the facts and circumstances surrounding the assassination and the subsequent killing of the alleged assassin, and to report its findings and conclusions to him. To him indeed. The very wording of their mandate tells us they already knew who did it, since they were going to investigate, number one, who did it and why Lee Oswald was killed. In a sense, you could say, case closed. If you have any further doubts or suspicions that the investigation did not have a preconceived conclusion, look at the names of the first 3 witnesses they called. Marina Oswald, Marguerite Oswald, Robert Oswald. And it was no accident. And it seems damn strange that they're trying to find out who killed the president, and the first 3 presidents are all related to a stock boy who worked in a warehouse overlooking the motorcade route. It is also very convenient that these people were called before anyone else was called, because as material leaked out, they could have countered the damage. Instead, they were called first. Quote, the U.S. Secret Service, which is responsible for the protection of the President, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation began an investigation at the direction of President Johnson. The Secret Service has no jurisdiction whatsoever in an investigative capacity. They never have. There was an article in the newspaper in northern New Jersey, and I don't know how much it was picked up on the wires, but because of that incident 2 weeks ago, with the guy taking target practice in front of the White House. Robert Carswell, quote, 1964 Kennedy source on the Secret Service, has been called in to give us an update on Secret Service efficiency. The bottom line is, when Robert Carswell was called to discuss the 1964 events, he was asked 5 questions by the Warren Commission, and they're basically, state your name, state your occupation, where do you live, how you doing, and is Speaker of the House McCormick under protection right now? Yes, thank you, goodbye. That was it. But the papers, our friends the newspapers, immediately pick up and say, oh yeah, the man that in 1964 helped rebuild the Secret Service from the ground up with 5 questions. And that, by the way, that's the distinction. He was asked the least number of questions. Is now dusted off again, just as somehow the same faces keep appearing in officialdom. Getting back to the report. Quote, throughout the world, reports on these events were disseminated in massive detail. Yes, but unfortunately they weren't disseminated in massive detail in the United States. We had to rely on what we were told by Mr. Hoover and later by the Warren Commission. Quote, the Commission is committing all of its reports and working papers to the National Archives where they can be permanently preserved. Boy, and they're doing that. Under the rules and regulations of the National Archives and applicable federal law. Marginal note. The papers are protected under federal law, although John Kennedy was not. Of note, since the assassination, it has become a federal crime to assassinate the president, so there will never again be the problem of local folks investigating a case where they might just get to the truth. Quote, after considering the facilities and security problems of several buildings, the trademark was chosen as the luncheon site. Given this selection, and in accordance with the customary practice of affording the greatest number of people an opportunity to see the president, the motorcade route selected was a natural one. Marginal comment, although it violated every imaginable Secret Service rule. And you could read that paragraph again, just changing one word. The trademark was chosen as the luncheon site. Given this selection, and in accordance with the customary practice of affording the greatest number of people an opportunity to shoot the president, the route selected was a natural one. Somehow this isn't as good without the olive. Seconds later, shots resounded in rapid succession, and they never actually tell you how many or how fast. It's just seconds later, shots. You know, you're supposed to know, and the president's hand moved to his neck. A bullet had entered the base of the back of his neck, slightly to the right of the spine. If it didn't, we got the wrong guy. And did you ever have one of those cramps where you just have to go back there and have somebody help you scratch the base of the back of your neck? Hey, you scratch the base of the back of your neck, and I'll, you know. More unambiguous wording is hard to imagine. Before the shooting started, Governor Connolly had been facing toward the crowd on the right. He started to turn toward the left, politically incorrect in Texas, and suddenly felt a blow on his back. The governor had been hit by a bullet which entered at the extreme right of his back and at a point below his right armpit. Passed through his right wrist, which had been in his lap. I mean, that takes the magic bullet to a degree beyond what we've ever considered weird. I'm telling you, his hand was in his lap, and you got to remember, the bullet entered the top of the wrist. Try sitting sometime with your hand in your lap, but people are going to start wondering about you. And then caused a wound to his left thigh. That must have been a heck of an angle. And number two, it overlooks a key bit of John Connolly testimony that we, for the most part, overlook. Most of us sit back and say, hey, wait a minute, you got to remember, John Connolly came forward and said, but I know I was hit by another bullet. Well, the Warren Commission said he was wrong. But the more important thing that he said was, he said, I heard what I immediately took to be a gunshot. I knew this was an assassination attempt. I have to be visual for this. I immediately turned to my right to see the president, but in turning to my right, I could not see him, so as I was turning back left to see him, I felt the shot. Now, what does that tell us? If you look at failure analysis, failure is a word I love to use in respect to Posner, but if you look at failure analysis thing, they've got John Connolly literally sitting on Nellie's lap, so that a bullet can enter Kennedy, 12-degree angle, right to left, enter at the base of the back of his neck, exit here, again going right to left, and then enter Connolly over here. Now, if Connolly has the ability or the difficulty in sitting there, turning to his right, and if he can't turn to his right and see the president, and has to turn to his left to see him, then he's right in front of him. How does that bullet go right to left and hit Connolly over here? And to me, that's my problem with the magic bullet. Not so much timing or anything else, but they were lined up. And that big, beautiful color picture that I saw today in the up in the sixth floor window, the Davis photo, those guys are right in line. And if you think about it, Connolly is sitting on that very uncomfortable jump seat. The only support he's got is the door. Kennedy's sitting in the back seat as comfortable as you could be, at least till Elm Street. And Connolly is so far away that there's no way he could have ever been hit by a bullet that went, even if it had gone straight through John Kennedy, it would have hit Connolly straight in the back. But to hit him over here, going this way, can't be done. Quote, seeing that the president was struck, Kellerman instructed the driver, let's get out of here. I don't know what else he would have said. We are hit. And it's interesting that they quoted Roy Kellerman on that, because there's a lot of other things that Roy Kellerman did say on the record that they chose not to quote. He radioed ahead to the lead car, get us to the hospital immediately. Agent Greer immediately accelerated the presidential car. As it gained speed, Agent Hill managed to pull himself onto the back of the car where Mrs. Kennedy had climbed. Hill pushed her back into the rear seat, showing they didn't look at the Z film too closely, and shielded the stricken president. It makes it sound like, in that account, that the car sped up when it should have, and it's also odd that Hill is given as much credit, and believe me, I respect Clint Hill. But when he testified that the back of the president's head was removed but was visible on the back seat of the limo, he was ignored. And who saw better? With respect to the Parkland doctors, they observed the extensive wound in the president's head. Quote, and the Warren Commission didn't believe a friggin' word they said about it. The narrative then tells of the trip to Love Field, etc., without any mention whatsoever that a local autopsy had been avoided. And we pick it up at Bethesda, Maryland, where it was given a complete pathological examination. I'm glad they used the word pathological in there. Because I'm highly convinced that somehow pathological and pathetic have the same Latin derivative somewhere back in Middle English or something. And one thing that's always troubled me, when you watch, whether it's Murder, She Wrote or Matlock or reruns of Quincy, I don't think I've ever seen a televised post-mortem where there isn't a microphone hanging down and the doctor speaks into it and says everything. Amazingly, of course, there was not one of those in Bethesda, Maryland. And it's just incredibly troubling that they couldn't afford a microphone and a tape recorder down the block here for Oswald's, when they debriefed him or whatever they did, and they couldn't afford a microphone in Bethesda, the great American microphone shortage. And I'm also convinced that if they had had a microphone, the most interesting thing that we would have heard on those tapes from the three fellows that did the autopsy would have been, yeah, that's a dead body, all right. Complete pathological examination. Stick your finger in there and see where it goes. The autopsy disclosed a large head wound. Well, if they'd have missed it, the autopsy disclosed a large head wound observed at Parkland and the wound in the front of the neck, which had been enlarged by the Parkland doctors when they performed the tracheotomy. And folks, we know the examination did not disclose the front of the neck wound. They found out about that by telephone the following day. But there it is. That's the Warren report. You got to believe it. Your government printed it. In addition, the autopsy revealed a small wound of entry in the rear of the president's skull and another wound of entry near the base of the back of the neck. If we tell you enough times, maybe you'll believe it. Quote, at the scene of the shooting, and I'm so glad that Beverly is here for me to read this. This makes it even better. Quote, at the scene of the shooting, there was evident confusion at the outset concerning the point of origin of the shots. The only confusion as to the origin of the shots is in a Warren report. You can see the pictures, you can see the films, everybody runs to the knoll. One officer, one policeman went to the book depository, and we'll get to him in a minute. Within a few minutes, however, attention centered on the Texas School Book Depository building as the source of the shots. Yeah, with all those fellows running around with the fake credentials saying, the building, of course attention centered on it. One eyewitness, Howard L. Brennan, had been watching the parade from a point on Elm Street, directly opposite and facing the building. And this is an absolute fabrication, and they knew it. David Bellin even said to him, we can't see your legs hanging over here on this frame in the Zapruder film, because Brennan is looking back over his shoulder to see the car. Brennan was looking straight ahead at Houston Street. If you get to Dealey Plaza at any time this week, take somebody with you, stand where Zapruder stood, have your friends sit where Howard Brennan claimed to be, and you'll see the difference immediately. If you've never read his book, Eyewitness to History, that's good fiction too, believe me. When I refer to it, I change the title slightly. I call it Eyewitness to History. The best story in there, he got FBI protection. God knows why. He didn't have anything to say. But one of the FBI agents was an exact double for John Kennedy, and the agent admitted that, yeah, on frequent occasions I used to double for Kennedy. I wonder what the occasions were. Brennan thought, now, this, tongue-in-cheek, but this is serious. You got to listen to the wording of this, because this is the garbage they sold to the American public. Brennan thought he might be able to identify the man since he had noticed him in the window a few minutes before the motorcade made the turn onto Elm Street. In fact, he could not identify him. The implication is suggested, and it is never anywhere denied. There it is. You fill in. You complete the closure there. Oh, he thought he could. But he couldn't and didn't. Now this gets to Marion Baker, who did his job. Baker, having recently returned from a week of deer hunting, was certain the shot came from a high-powered rifle. He looked up and saw pigeons scattering in the air from their perches on the Texas School Book Depository. Now here I have two serious concerns. One was Officer Baker deer hunting amid tall buildings. And number two, were those pigeons on the depository trained only to scatter when the bullet was fired from the building they were perched on? Hey, was that this building or was it from the knoll? Because if it's this building, we got to scatter. If it's the knoll, we can sit here. Of course they're going to scatter. As he reached the front wheel on the driver's side, the man on the sidewalk, it was Tippett reaching the driver's side, the man on the sidewalk drew a revolver and fired several, there again that's that ambiguity, several shots in rapid succession, hitting 4 times and killing him instantly. Now the several shots phrase allows for them to immediately clear up the confusion of that nonsense with this kind of bullet and this kind of cartridge. And it also, inasmuch as the Warren Commission would later rely on Helen Markham, who admitted to having a conversation with Tippett after he was killed instantly. Since the witness can't be wrong, history is rewritten. I love this one. Shortly after 1 p.m., Captain J. Will Fritz, chief of the Homicide and Robbery Bureau of the Dallas Police Department, arrived to take charge of the investigation. Take charge should be used cautiously, as in, after he realized his ship had hit an iceberg, the captain of the Titanic took charge. Lieutenant Day promptly noted that stamped on the rifle itself was the serial number C2766, as well as the markings 1940, Made Italy, and Cal period 6.5. Everybody else in that room, in that sixth floor, must have been stone deaf, as we know that others wrote reports about the gun being a Mauser. And on that point, why, to make our job and our understanding of this a whole lot easier, why didn't the Warren Commission simply get a Mauser, take a picture of it, and publish it, and say, now, you judge. Did they make an honest mistake? Or is there more to this? And since they didn't, we can only put a sinister interpretation on it. And I want to share something with you from a newspaper, and this is in newspaper print. The New York Journal American, now defunct, Saturday, November 23rd, assassin named. Marksman, Castro Red, like there are a lot of different kinds of red. What was he going to be, a Castro Claret? It was written by Bob Considine, a noted journalist at the time. And what I want to share with you here is the precision with which this article is written. The 24-year-old ex-Marine marksman who attempted to defect to the Soviet Union in 1959 and was returned to this country with a $435.71 U.S. grant. That's not the president. They knew to the penny how much money he got to come back here. That's precision. Justice of the Peace David Johnston handled the arraignment. Most people, just from habit, say David Johnson. He got it right. I'll find it. I didn't want to mark this up. While no positive fingerprints were found on the abandoned Mauser, a paraffin test was made on his right cheek and produced evidence from the pores that they had been recently bombarded with recoil smoke. The assassination seemed carefully planned. Mauser rifle with a telescopic sight found in the building's fifth floor stairwell was clean of fingerprints, police said. There's several other references to a Mauser rifle in here. Again, after about 5 hours of questioning, Oswald acknowledged, and this is a burst of revelation, Oswald acknowledged that he was in the school book warehouse at the time a bullet fired from a Mauser rifle equipped with a sharpshooter's telescopic sight plunged through the head of the president as the chief executive and his party moved by at 15 miles per hour. Mauser. Having said those things, I would like to do three things to conclude this evening. The first is a plea, and this is an urgent plea and it's serious, for unity among all of us here that still care enough about these events to find our way here, to pay expenses, and to listen to hours of people talking to us. In the last couple of years, some very unpleasant things have been said in a severely critical way about members of the research community, by members of the research community. I have read that researchers who have begun this conference and people who have opened their hearts, their homes, and their files to me personally are literally co-conspirators in the crime we're trying to solve. There's no law that you have to believe a postulate or a given writer or speaker. If you disagree, as I do with some researchers, please agree to disagree with a commonality of purpose that does not prove divisive to the research community. In some cases, we have become our own worst enemies, and that should not be. Thank you. Thank you. The second request is, in a sense, a corollary of the first. Many of you have read much of what has been printed. Some have read only some. Regardless, you will be seeing much that is new in the future, either in the form of new publications or old ones that you were unaware of. Please read carefully and critically. Just because you go out and buy something and read it doesn't mean that well, that's a poor example. Everything, that one's okay. But that doesn't mean everyone you buy is going to be just chock full of the gospel. And a loose fact at a symposium in an article, in a book, with no footnote, no help. Oh, geez, did you know Oswald spent 6 months in Canada before he went to Mexico? No, I mean, this is, this is the Gat assassination. Read critically. Be critical. If it's good, buy 100 of them for your friends. Put them on the bestseller list, because that's the way we're going to get back in notice. And if it's not good, let the world know, hey, this one isn't worth your time. Or buy it and learn from its errors. Take what's good out of it and continue to support the research community. Just to read something doesn't make it true. If that were the case, I would stop at this point and hand out a mimeograph sheet that I have home entitled, in a folder entitled Shooters. It contains the name of 34 people, and I'm sure I've missed a couple, that have been seen, published as shooters in this case. The list is so long and obviously inaccurate, well, it even includes Oswald. Nevertheless, there are 34 names on the list at this point, meaning that in JFK conspiracy books, there are at least 34 people that authors have cited as being, quote, the shooters. It may be true, but if it is, I don't know how anybody survived in the Ely Plaza. So please, be critical. The reason I put together the JFK assassination quiz book was simply to guarantee that anyone who wants to can begin with a database, with facts, stuff that you can document. There's no speculations in there. From there, build slowly. Nobody in this room is going to solve this case over the weekend, although I suspect there are a couple of folks who are not here tonight that think they've already solved it twice. We're only going to make progress if we work together, if we respect each other's opinions, and if we find areas where we can take a step or two forward gradually. I can't tell you a heck of a lot about what the CIA was up to because I haven't seen the documents that I would certainly like to see. I've chosen to work on that which I have available to me, the Warren Commission's work and documents that I've been able to pry out. And from those limited sources, I've done what I can. I would also make the offer that any editing, manuscript reading, or help that I can provide to any researcher, I freely offer. And anything I have in my files is available for use by any researchers that need it, and it's just that simple. Just be careful when you're going through my files. Lastly, I'm going to read you a letter that I've written to President Clinton. I believe it says, in a kind and gentle way, something, perhaps many things, that we all feel and that we all believe in and we can all subscribe to. I shall only read you the text, although I will tell you now that I will be signing the letter at the bottom simply, Walt Brown, American. I would hope that each of you would be willing to sign the letter also, because I believe it makes a reasonable case in a reasonable way. However, I would ask you to sign it sometime tomorrow, Sunday, Monday, and not tonight, because after I conclude the letter, the time will be given over to a reception for all the authors and researchers that have come here to share their thoughts and their work with you, and that time is time you should spend with them. If you do not feel comfortable signing the letter, I would look forward to speaking with you either way, and certainly as many as possible. As you have patiently listened to my work, I would like to hear what you're doing, and if I can be of any help, we'll get going on something. Again, I hope you find this letter such that you'd be willing to put your name on it along with mine. Dear President Clinton, it is just past twilight at the Adolphus Hotel in Midtown Dallas, Texas, on the evening of November 18th, 1994. Gathered here are several hundred people who came to this site this weekend because they saved a couple of vacation days, because they cut a corner or two on the grocery budget, or because they put off the new car for a couple extra months, or because they got the car and drove it here all night to be here for this weekend. For the most part, however, these people are here because they will not allow the memory or the vision of John F. Kennedy to disappear forever from the American landscape or its agenda. As such, they are the last survivors of a race of Americans who once felt so strongly about John Kennedy and his vision for America that they made those same kind of sacrifices to allow Mr. Kennedy to reside for 1,037 days in the home where you now live. I have been honored to give the keynote address this evening as part of the weekend activities planned by the Assassination Symposium on John F. Kennedy, ASK. I know that my words this evening will bring a tear to the eyes of these wonderful people as they see in their minds images of an America that is now on the distant periphery of our horizon. A young, boyish president laughing while a pony nuzzles him. Preschool children playing hide and seek in the Oval Office. A father and his young son sitting in a beached rowboat. That same young boy's bittersweet farewell salute to his fallen father. Those images and more will be recalled this weekend. Also recalled will be John Kennedy's stirring inaugural rhetoric, which awoke America from years of post-war doldrums, as well as the less idealistic yet highly practical rhetoric employed by the president when he showed his and America's toughness in the face of foreign missiles, arguably the first step in the long process which eventually led to the demise of the evil empire which had targeted those deadly denizens literally in America's backyard. Ultimately, of course, they will focus on the two images frozen forever and in time by the events in Dealey Plaza. The first was the unfinished promise of a new direction for America, a direction that promised a generation of peace, equal civil rights for all, and a decent standard of living for all Americans, which would, by its example, guarantee that American ideals and the American dream would be sought by the world, thereby lessening the need to counter by force of arms other ideologies which would pale by comparison. John F. Kennedy's vision for the world was no more and no less than America's promise since its inception. Only John Kennedy intended for the promise to finally become reality. That promise, like its author, died in Dealey Plaza. And that is the final image frozen forever in time and memorialized at symposia such as this gathering at the site of the tragedy. We are reminded of the overflow crowds from Love Field, through miles of a motorcade, when a violent act robbed America of its best and brightest on an otherwise peaceful, sunny autumn afternoon amidst tens of thousands of well-wishers in a political district that John Kennedy had not won in 1960. The dreamer is gone, but the dream lives on among these people in Dallas this evening, as well as among millions of other Americans throughout our land. But while we cannot restore the dreamer, we dream of the day when we can do that which John Kennedy would have most sought, to find the simple truth. It has been 31 years since John Kennedy's vision for America ended violently in the middle of Elm Street, shortly before a planned luncheon address aimed, among other purposes, at getting out the vote for the following year. Since that agonizing weekend in 1963, many Americans have devoted time, energy, and resources in an attempt to come to grips with the reality of November 22nd, 1963. Although there exists a clear consensus on where and when the event occurred, there is in our land a terrible divisiveness about the who and the why, and to a lesser extent, the how. Sadly, some of this divisiveness is born of infrequent attempts at cheap sensationalism, and America is poorer for such efforts. But for the most part, the concern stems from the fact that every time this tragedy is investigated, more materials are locked away. This is simply not the American way, and it never was. The Warren Commission went out of business 30 years ago, yet they sequestered some files until the year 2039, when you and I, Mr. Clinton, will be in our early 90s. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, which found a conspiracy of sorts, locked up their working papers until 2028, an improvement over 2039, but not much of one. Mr. President, I know that John Kennedy the man and John Kennedy the vision were of utmost significance in your formative years. I also know that you have visited his gravesite, a place where I have gone to reflect on what is and to reflect on what might have been. In my own mind, I suspect you have had somewhat similar thoughts when you were there. Yet President Kennedy's simple plot and eternal flame are but a part of the landscape which contains them. And both the casual tourist who visits Arlington Cemetery and the admirers of John Kennedy must file past thousands of other graves to visit JFK's. Those graves, too, reflect the purpose I have tried to instill in my words to the people at this symposium in Dallas. For the men and the women in those countless plots gave their lives in far-flung corners of this planet, in nations they may have never studied about in school, just because America had a vision of freedom and decency for all people of the world, just as JFK had a vision for all, for the elderly, for those with his vigor, and most of all for the children, who would hopefully reach John Kennedy's age without having to spend extended periods of time in backyard bomb shelters. Those graves are filled with people who died for American principles that are being denied to the memory of John F. Kennedy. The centerpiece of those thousands of graves. Those plots, that vast expanse of Robert E. Lee's former real estate, are filled with Americans, some unknown, who died for the concepts of truth and justice. 31 years after the passing of John Kennedy, those of us here in Dallas join millions elsewhere in seeking to truly close the case on the death of John F. Kennedy. We have sidetracked our daily pursuits for over 3 decades because we know, Mr. President, that John Kennedy's vision was not ended as the result of a lucky shot by a misfit punk with a cheap rifle. If only it were that easy. The truth, however, could be. While many would plead for a new investigation into the death of Mr. Kennedy, I will not so petition. I know that such an inquiry would be both fruitless and costly, and the millions of dollars and legislative hours involved would be better spent on children who do not have adequate school lunches, or senior citizens who suffer through unspeakable pain at the end of their productive lives because they cannot afford decent health care. No, Mr. President, I can't even ask you to spend my meager tax dollars to satisfy my omnipresent curiosity and concern about the events of November 22nd, 1963. But I can ask you for your autograph. Or rather, I can humbly ask you to pick up a piece of inexpensive stationery and a pen, just as Lincoln wrote a Gettysburg Address draft on an envelope, and sign an order to release all materials from all agencies that bear in any way on the death of John Kennedy. It has been 31 years, Mr. President. The justifications of, quote, national security that sounded so ominous and so important when you and I were teenagers are no longer valid. It is hard to imagine even one piece of paper that needs to remain hidden for even one more day, given that we are talking about an event that happened before half of the current American population was born. True, there is a review board looking into the review of those materials, but that is, to date, mostly form and not a lot of substance, and time and resources are wasted to no purpose as I speak this evening. Simply order a release of the files. Whatever is behind those mysterious vaults and those stripes of magic mark ink will be the subject of some contention between researchers, but it will be their job to get to the truth, and based on all the facts, I'm convinced they will. It will cost this nation nothing, not even the black eye that might be expected when the full truth of November 22nd emerged, as the rest of the world and countless Americans already take the perfidy of past investigations for granted. And consider the gain. If all the energy currently expended to get to the bottom of the events of November 22nd were channeled into some other productive avenue, would that not constitute a huge gain for all Americans? And what nation in any past time frame in recorded history has ever truly come clean of a dubious event in its past? Yet is that not the basis of our nation? Weren't we created as a nation as the last best hope for mankind? Of course we were. It just takes extreme courage to live up to the promise. The soldiers and their families around John Kennedy at Arlington all had that courage, and they expended it all in one last heroic measure so that American children could grow to adulthood in a land of truth and peace and shine their own beacons to the rest of mankind. John Kennedy understood the same kind of courage and wrote about it in a bestseller. His vision of America meant so much to him that he rode through a political cauldron in an open car in broad daylight. He gambled and he lost. Pick up that pen, Mr. President. It will be the most courageous act ever taken in the Oval Office in the White House. And if you listen carefully, you will hear a grateful nation gently sigh because truth will have reappeared in our vision of ourselves. Ask not what your country can do for you, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again.
I'll sign that letter, won't you? Yeah, thank you, Walt. Excellent. I hope you've been stirred. I have. Let's have a good time. Let's learn from each other. The reception will be outside here. If I can help you in any way, let's do so, and see you in the morning. We can solve this thing.